She raised another woman's child until the billionaire CEO discovered the switch. The baby didn't make it, Dominic. Marina Colby's hands trembled as she held the phone, her voice cracking on those 6 words. But here's what you need to know before we continue. The baby she was talking about, perfectly healthy, sleeping peacefully in the nursery 3 floors above. And the lie she just told, worth exactly $2.3 million in child support she'd never see. But to understand why a 24-year-old woman with exactly $247.63 in her bank account would tell that lie, you need to know what happened 12 hours earlier. Because this story, this devastating, beautiful, impossible story, doesn't start with a lie. It starts with a storm and a mistake so simple, so innocent, that no one noticed it happening. Ask yourself this before we go any further. Could you love a child for 12 years and then discover they weren't biologically yours? Would that change anything? Remember your answer. You're going to need it. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and fear. November 14th, 11:43 p.m. Mercy General Hospital's emergency wing, where the lights flickered like dying fireflies because the main power grid had failed at exactly 9:17 p.m. Winds outside were clocking 67 miles per hour, and Marina Colby was about to give birth 3 weeks early in the middle of the worst storm the city had seen in 14 years. Her water had broken at 10:52 p.m. in her studio apartment above Giuseppe's laundromat on the east side, 423 square feet that cost her $875 a month. She could barely afford. The contractions had started 6 minutes later. By 11:15, she was in an ambulance, alone, gripping the hand of a paramedic whose name she'd never remember. Dramatic timing, huh? She'd joked through gritted teeth as another contraction hit. The paramedic, 26 years old, his first month on the job, had laughed nervously. He had no idea he was witnessing the beginning of something that would destroy and remake 4 lives. If you can leave after hearing that, you've never understood what real sacrifice looks like, but you're still here. That means something. Marina arrived at Mercy General at 11:38 p.m., just as the backup generator kicked in with a mechanical groan that echoed through the hallways. Nurses were scrambling. The emergency wing was operating on generator B because the primary had failed at 11:41 p.m., 3 minutes after she arrived. Everything was chaos. Everything was wrong. And in that chaos, in those flickering lights and shouted medical codes, Nurse Stephanie Morrison, 37 years old, 14 hours into her shift, was trying to hold everything together. "We've got her," Nurse Morrison told the paramedics, taking control with the kind of efficiency that comes from delivering dozens of babies in conditions that weren't ideal. But exhaustion has a way of making people sloppy. Small sloppiness, the kind nobody notices until it's 12 years too late. Marina's labor moved fast. Too fast for the epidural she'd wanted but couldn't afford anyway. The delivery room was dim, emergency lights casting shadows that made everything feel like a nightmare you can't wake up from. But Marina had been living a nightmare for 3 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days ever since Jackson left. Jackson, the man who'd promised forever and delivered $340 in an envelope with no note. The father who'd looked her in the eye at 12 weeks pregnant and said, "I'm not ready to be anyone's father. I'm sorry." But Marina didn't have time to think about Jackson now. She was too busy bringing a baby into a world that felt like it was ending. 12:04 a.m., November 15th. A baby girl, 6 pounds 8 ounces, gray eyes that looked nothing like Marina's warm brown ones, sharp features where Marina's were soft, a face that Marina would love fiercely for 12 years without ever knowing it wasn't genetically hers. "She's beautiful," the nurse said, placing the infant on Marina's chest. And she was. Perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a cry that was surprisingly strong for being 3 weeks early. Marina looked down at those gray eyes and felt something click into place in her chest, something permanent, something that would survive the truth that was coming. "Sophie," Marina whispered. "Your name is Sophie." But here's what you need to know, and this is the part that matters. The identification band that nurse placed on that tiny wrist? Wrong. The bassinet card she grabbed in the chaos? Wrong. The baby Marina was holding, the one she was already falling in love with? Not Sophie. Not hers. 8 minutes later, 3 floors above in Suite 7B, another woman was giving birth. Suite 7B cost $3,200 per night. It had marble bathrooms, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the storm-ravaged city, and a temperature precisely maintained at 68.5 degrees Fahrenheit, because that's what Vivian Drake had requested. Vivian Drake, born Vivian Hartwell to a family worth $340 million in old money. Married to Dominic Drake, who'd turned a single app into a $2.3 billion empire in less than 10 years. A woman who'd never wanted children but understood they were part of the performance required in her social circle. Her epidural had been administered at 10:15 p.m. Her delivery was controlled, clinical, efficient. Dr. Patricia Reeves, 52 years old, 23 years of experience. 2,847 babies delivered. Guided the process with calm expertise. 12:12 a.m., 8 minutes after Marina's baby was born. Another girl, 7 pounds 2 ounces, warm brown eyes, soft features, a baby who would grow up in a penthouse that overlooked the entire city but would always feel cold. Dominic Drake stood by his wife's bed, his hand trembling despite his best efforts to appear calm. His pulse was at 94 beats per minute. His mind was racing through the same calculations it always did: risk assessments, probability analyses, outcome predictions. But when Dr. Reeves placed his daughter in his arms, all those calculations stopped. He'd built an empire on logic. He'd made his first million by the age of 27. He'd taken Drake Technologies from a startup in his college apartment to a publicly traded company with 4,847 employees across 23 countries. But nothing in his precisely calculated life had prepared him for the overwhelming wave of love that hit him when he looked down at his daughter's face. "She's adequate," Vivian said from the bed, her voice detached, clinical. She hadn't asked to hold the baby yet. Dominic felt something crack in his chest. Not break, just crack. A hairline fracture that would widen over the next 12 years until his marriage finally shattered completely. "She's perfect," he whispered, looking down at the infant in his arms. At Marina's biological daughter. At the child who had warm brown eyes that matched the mother 3 floors below. If you're like me, you already see the tragedy taking shape. But knowing what's coming doesn't prepare you for how it happens. 1:47 a.m., hospital nursery, backup generator wing. This is where it happened. This is the moment that changed everything. 6 babies in the nursery during the evacuation. All girls. All wearing pink identification bands with handwritten names because the computer system was down and the label printer had no backup power. Nurse Morrison was on her 14th hour. Her feet hurt. Her back ached. She'd delivered 3 babies tonight and overseen the evacuation of the nursery when water started dripping from a ceiling leak directly above bassinet 4. Sophie's bassinet. Except the baby inside wasn't Sophie. And the water from that leak, just 3 drops. Nothing serious had smudged the handwritten name on the band. In 11 minutes, Nurse Morrison would rebrand all 6 babies. In 11 minutes, she would place the wrong identification band on the wrong tiny wrist. In 11 minutes, she would make a mistake that would take 12 years, 4 months, and 7 days to uncover. You're probably thinking someone should have noticed. Someone should have checked. And you're right. But this is how life changes, not in dramatic moments of obvious catastrophe, but in small, innocent actions taken by exhausted people trying their best. The generator kicked back on at 2:03 a.m. The lights brightened. The chaos settled. Babies were returned to their mothers. Marina received a baby girl with brown eyes and soft features. She looked down at this infant Isabel Drake, though the band now read Sophie Colby, and thought, "She looks different than I remember." But newborns change fast. Everyone knows that. And the nurses were professional. They wouldn't make a mistake. Vivienne received a baby girl with gray eyes and sharp features. She didn't notice the difference because she'd barely looked at her daughter the first time. When Dominic came to check on them at 2:15 a.m., he frowned slightly. "Her eyes look different," he said. "Baby's eyes change color," Vivienne replied dismissively. "Stop being dramatic." Dominic looked down at the infant Sophie Colby, though her band now read Isabel Drake, and felt that same overwhelming love. His daughter. His brilliant, beautiful daughter. Nothing else mattered. Before we continue, ask yourself, at what point does love become real? When you first hold a baby? After the first sleepless night? after 12 years of scraped knees and school plays and bedtime stories? Remember your answer. It matters. 3 weeks later, Marina sat in her studio apartment at 3:22 a.m., feeding the baby she believed was Sophie. The apartment was cramped, cold, because she kept the heat at 62 degrees to save money. Her hospital bill was $12,847. She'd set up a payment plan, $175 per month for 6 years. Her savings account showed $112.19. Her mother had brought over groceries $43 worth that she couldn't really afford on her fixed income of $1,847 per month. Her arthritis made it hard to help with the baby, but she tried. Jackson hadn't called, hadn't texted, had completely disappeared like he'd never existed. Marina looked down at the baby in her arms. Isabel, though she'd been calling her Sophie, and made a decision that would define the next 12 years of her life. "I'll give you everything," she whispered. "Everything I have, everything I am. You'll never feel unwanted. You'll never feel like you're not enough." She had no idea she was making that promise to a billionaire's biological daughter. Had no idea that across town, in a penthouse worth $14 million, Dominic Drake was making a similar promise to her biological daughter. Most people will click away now because this hits too close to home. If you're still watching, comment, "I stayed below." Let's see who actually has the courage. Marina didn't just survive the next 12 years. She fought through them with a kind of fierce determination that most people would judge until they understood what real love looks like. She got hired at Sunrise Bookstore Cafe within 2 weeks, $12.50 per hour, working morning shifts while her mother watched the baby. She picked up freelance editing work at night, $22 per hour, when she could find it, working on her laptop while the baby slept, existing on 4 hours of sleep and coffee she couldn't afford, but needed to function. By the time Sophie Isabel was 6 months old, Marina was working 3 jobs, bookstore cafe mornings, freelance editing nights, teaching literacy classes at the community center on weekends for $18 per hour, 62 to 68 hours per week, every week, for 12 years. Her hands developed arthritis from typing by the time she was 30. She hadn't been on a date since Jackson left, hadn't bought herself new clothes in 3 years, wore the same winter coat for 8 years until the zipper finally broke and she couldn't fix it anymore. But Sophie, the girl she believed was Sophie, never went to bed hungry, never missed a birthday party, never felt like she was a burden. Marina made sure of that. Most people would judge, but you understand love isn't about biology, it's about showing up every single day. And Marina showed up. Meanwhile, across town in a penthouse that cost $43,000 per month, Dominic Drake was learning that money couldn't buy the one thing he desperately wanted: time. Drake Technologies' headquarters occupied the 78th floor of the Ashford Tower. His corner office was 2,400 square feet, with views of the entire city. The company he'd founded in March 2011 now employed 4,847 people across 23 countries. His typical workday ran from 5:47 a.m. to 11:23 p.m. Time spent with his daughter per week, 6 hours and 42 minutes, averaged over the first year. Isabel Sophie, his biological daughter, had taken her first steps at 11 months old. Dominic missed it. He was in Tokyo closing an $87 million merger. She said her first word at 13 months, "Dada." He missed that too. Conference call with investors that ran 3 hours overtime. He missed her first day of preschool, missed her first recital, missed the moment she learned to read when she was 4 years and 7 months old. But he didn't miss the growing coldness between him and Vivienne. By year 2 of their marriage, they had separate bedrooms. By year 3, she was attending 14 to 17 social events per week without him. Her social calendar was packed with charity galas and museum fundraisers and exclusive dinner parties where she performed the role of Mrs. Dominic Drake with polished perfection. But at home, in the cold marble penthouse, she was a stranger to her own daughter. Stand straighter, Isabel. Enunciate. Drakes don't mumble. Drakes don't cry. Stop that immediately. The baby with the warm brown eyes, Marina's biological daughter, learned very quickly that emotions were weaknesses in the Drake household. She learned to swallow her tears, learned to need nothing from anyone, Learned that the penthouse was beautiful but hollow. You probably see where this is heading. Dominic built an empire, but he was about to discover he'd lost something far more valuable in the process. Pay attention to this next part. It matters in about 3 minutes. 12 years passed. 2 girls growing up in different worlds, both feeling like they didn't quite fit in the lives they'd been given. Sophie Marina's biological daughter, raised as Isabel Drake, grew up in a penthouse with a $47,000 Steinway piano. She played beautifully. She took writing lessons at $385 per hour. She had art instruction from a gallery-represented teacher. Her birthday parties cost $12,000 to $18,000 and were attended by 40 to 60 guests whose names she barely knew. She had everything. She felt nothing. The hollow ache in her chest, the one that luxury couldn't touch, made sense now, though she didn't know it yet. She was loved by a man who wasn't her biological father, tolerated coldly by a woman who somehow sensed the disconnect even without knowing the truth. Isabel Dominic's biological daughter, raised as Sophie Colby, grew up in a 423-square-foot apartment that smelled like laundry detergent from downstairs. She learned to read at 4 years and 7 months, with books from the library, her card worn soft from use. She taught herself melodies on a donated keyboard with 3 broken keys, F, G sharp, and B. She had almost nothing. She felt everything. The brilliant mind that teachers noticed by age 8. The gray eyes that made people do double takes. The sharp features that didn't quite match Marina's soft ones. The growing awareness that something about her didn't fit, though she couldn't name what. She noticed things. The way Marina never talked about her father beyond saying he left. The way Marina's hands shook with exhaustion at night. The way groceries were carefully calculated down to the dollar. The weight of being grateful for everything because everything was a sacrifice. By age 10, both girls had been identified by their teachers as exceptional. Sophie Colby, the girl raised in poverty, scored in the 98th percentile on standardized tests. Her creative writing made her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, cry. Her essays showed emotional depth that seemed impossible for a 10-year-old. Isabel Drake, the girl raised in wealth, played Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major at her school's recital with technical perfection that earned a standing ovation. But her performance felt hollow. Beautiful, but emotionless. Perfect, but cold. This was the last normal year of their lives, though neither of them knew it yet. Jefferson Middle School, March 15th, 4:47 p.m. Marina sat in the parent-teacher conference room, her hands folded in her lap, trying not to let her exhaustion show. She'd worked the morning shift at the cafe, edited a manuscript during lunch, and rushed here directly from her second job. Mrs. Rodriguez, 23 years teaching, 54 years old. The kind of teacher who remembers every student forever, looked at Marina with the intensity of someone about to change a life. "Sophie is extraordinary," she said simply. "And I'm not just saying that. In 23 years, I've identified 14 candidates for the Ashford Academy Scholarship Program. 11 of them succeeded. Sophie would be number 12. Marina's breath caught. Ashford Academy. She knew the name. Everyone did. Founded 1887. Tuition, $42,850 per year. 487 students. The kind of school where senators sent their children. Where CEOs sent their children. Where Dominic Drake sent his daughter, Isabel. The scholarship covers everything," Mrs. Rodriguez continued, sliding a folder across the table. "Full tuition. Books. Lunch. Technology." Sophie's essay scored 97 out of 100. That's the highest score in 8 years. Her acceptance rate, 6.2%. But I think she has a real shot. Marina stared at the folder. Inside were details about a world so far removed from their life above the laundromat that it felt fictional. Marble hallways. Computer labs with equipment worth more than Marina earned in a year. Teachers with PhDs. College acceptance rates of 94%. A world where Sophie could become anything. A world that terrified Marina because it would take Sophie away from her. "What do you think?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked gently. Marina looked up, and Mrs. Rodriguez saw something in her eyes that made her understand. This mother would sacrifice anything, even her fear of inadequacy, for her daughter's future. "I think," Marina said quietly, "we should apply." That night, Marina and Sophie sat on their worn couch, bought secondhand 8 years ago for $63, and talked about the application. "Do you want me to?" Sophie asked. She was perceptive, always had been. She could read the fear underneath her mother's pride. Marina pulled her daughter close. Isabel, her Isabel, though she didn't know it. Dominic Drake's biological daughter, who'd inherited his brilliant mind and fierce determination. "I want you to have every opportunity I never had," Marina said, "even if it scares me." The application process took 8 weeks and 3 days. Essays about resilience that Sophie wrote in her careful handwriting. Interviews where she wore her best outfit, a dress from Goodwill that cost $4.99 but looked decent enough, a portfolio of her creative writing that showcased talent that couldn't be taught. April 27th, 4:23 p.m. The mail came. Marina stood in the tiny apartment, holding an envelope with the Ashford Academy crest embossed on expensive paper. Her hands were shaking. Sophie stood next to her, barely breathing. Marina opened it. "We are pleased to inform you." They celebrated with ice cream sundaes Marina made at home, with ingredients that cost $7.47 total. They were the best ice cream sundaes Sophie had ever tasted. Before we continue, if this story mattered, you'd hit that subscribe button. The fact that you haven't yet tells me everything. Prove me wrong. September 4th, 8:47 a.m. Ashford Academy, Room 214. Advanced English Composition. Sophie Colby walked into the marble hallway school wearing a uniform borrowed from the scholarship program. It fit well enough. The slight wear on the cuffs wasn't too noticeable, but she felt it. Felt the difference between her second-hand everything and the custom-tailored perfection surrounding her. 19 students in the classroom, 14 from families worth $10 million or more. One teacher, Mr. Bernard Whitmore, 68 years old, 34 years at Ashford. The kind of educator who believed every student deserved his full attention. "Class, this is Sophie Colby, our newest scholarship recipient," Mr. Whitmore said with genuine warmth. "Sophie, welcome. There's an empty seat next to Isabel." Sophie looked toward the back of the classroom, and time stopped. 8:53 a.m. The exact moment two switched daughters saw each other for the first time. Isabel Drake sat in her custom-tailored uniform, $847, staring at the girl walking toward her with an expression of absolute shock. Gray eyes, sharp features, the distinctive shape of her nose, the angle of her jaw, the way she held her head slightly tilted when uncertain. Isabel had never met anyone with eyes like hers. It was her most distinctive feature. The one thing that made her recognizably Isabel Drake in every photograph, every family portrait, every social event. And this girl, this scholarship student in the worn uniform, had her exact eyes. Sophie felt it too. The impossible recognition. The sense of looking into a mirror that showed a life she could have lived. This girl with the expensive uniform and confident posture had her face, not similar, identical. They stared at each other for 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours. "Hi," Isabel said, her usual aloofness cracking. "Hi," Sophie replied, sliding into the seat next to her. Mr. Whitmore began discussing the syllabus, but neither girl heard a word. They were stealing glances at each other, minds racing through impossible explanations. Coincidence? Maybe. The world had 7.8 billion people. Doppelgangers existed. But those eyes, those exact gray eyes that weren't common, weren't ordinary, weren't the kind of thing that happened twice by accident. If you saw someone who looked exactly like you, would you ask them about it? Or would fear keep you silent? Both girls chose silence. For now, class ended at 9:47 a.m. They'd spent 54 minutes sitting 2 feet 4 inches apart, pretending to focus on the syllabus while actually trying to solve the impossible equation of each other's faces. "See you tomorrow," Isabel said as they gathered their things. "Yeah," Sophie replied. "See you." They walked in different directions, but both of them spent the rest of the day unable to think about anything else. They had exactly 37 days before everything imploded, but neither of them knew the clock was ticking. The friendship formed slowly, carefully, like two people approaching something fragile that might break if handled wrong. September 18th, cafeteria, Table 7. First lunch together. Sophie had brought her usual lunch. Sandwich made with discount bread, apple from the 99-cent bag, water bottle refilled from the fountain. She tried not to compare it to Isabel's catered meal that probably cost more than Sophie's weekly grocery budget. But Isabel wasn't looking at the food. She was looking at Sophie with genuine curiosity. "How are you finding Ashford?" she asked. "Overwhelming," Sophie admitted honestly. "But good." "It can be intense," Isabel agreed. Then, softer. "Lonely too, even when you're surrounded by people." Sophie understood immediately, because she felt it too. The loneliness that came from never quite fitting anywhere. October 2nd. Library. 4:47 to 6:23 p.m. First after-school study session. They'd been partnered for a history project, but the project became conversation, and the conversation became confession. "My mom works 3 jobs, Sophie said, not with shame but with pride. "She's the strongest person I know." Isabel felt something twist in her chest. "My father works all the time too, but I don't think he knows me. Not really." "And your mom?" Isabel's face went carefully blank. "My mother thinks emotions are weaknesses. Drakes don't cry. Drakes don't need anyone. Drakes are perfect." Sophie reached across the table and squeezed Isabel's hand. It was instinctive, the kind of gesture Marina had taught her through 12 years of showing love in action. Isabel stared at their joined hands like she'd never seen human connection before. Maybe she hadn't, not like this. Over the next 12 weeks, they discovered 47 different topics they could discuss for hours. They found 14 shared interests: writing, specific books, the same irrational fears, the same way of processing emotions. They were opposites in economics, but identical in soul. Teachers noticed their partnership. Other students were confused why was a Drake befriending a scholarship student, but both girls ignored the social pressure. They were building something real, something that would need to be unbreakable, because in exactly 8 weeks, they would need each other more than they'd ever needed anyone. December 12th, 10:17 a.m. Biology classroom, Mr. Hammond's genetics unit. Mr. Hammond was 27 years old, second year teaching, biology PhD, genuinely enthusiastic about science, in a way that made students actually pay attention. "Today we're tracking hereditary traits," he announced, passing out worksheets, 23 traits to document. "You'll need to know your blood type, your parents' blood types, eye colors, hair colors, basic genetic inheritance patterns." It was supposed to be a simple assignment. It was about to become life-altering horror disguised as mundane classroom activity. Sophie filled out her worksheet carefully. Blood type, AB negative. She remembered that detail because it had been discovered during her appendectomy last year, October 2023. An emergency surgery that cost $8,472 that Marina was still paying off in monthly installments. Marina's blood type, O positive. Sophie frowned. She'd paid attention during the genetics lecture. O positive parents couldn't produce AB negative children. It was biologically impossible. Across the room, Isabel was frowning at her own worksheet. Her blood type, O positive. Her mother Vivienne, a negative. Her father Dominic, AB negative. The inheritance patterns didn't match correctly either. Not impossibly, not definitely, but enough to make her pause. Both girls caught each other's eyes across the classroom. Both recognized identical panic. 10:34 a.m. Sophie's world tilted. 10:36 a.m. Isabel's world fractured. The class continued around them. Mr. Hammond was explaining Punnett squares. Other students were comparing traits with their parents, finding matches and laughing about whose nose they inherited. Sophie and Isabel sat frozen, minds racing through impossible explanations. Adoption? Maybe. But wouldn't their parents have told them? Mistake? But blood types were documented at birth. The gray eyes. The identical features. The same birthday they'd discovered that weeks ago and thought it was a funny coincidence. The same hospital. They'd laughed about that too. November 14th. Mercy General. Both born at Mercy General on November 14th. Walking away now means you don't actually care about how this ends. You just want easy entertainment. But you're better than that, aren't you? Class ended at 11:03 a.m. Both girls stayed behind, approaching Mr. Hammond's desk together without planning it. "Mr. Hammond?" Sophie's voice was shaking. "There's something wrong with my worksheet." Isabel held hers up too. "Mine too." Mr. Hammond looked at both worksheets. His expression shifted through confusion, recognition, and then slowly horror. He looked up at the two girls standing before him. Same height, same sharp features, same gray eyes. "When were you born?" he asked carefully. "November 14th, they said in unison, then stopped, staring at each other. "What hospital?" "Mercy General," Sophie whispered. "Mercy General," Isabel echoed. Mr. Hammond leaned back in his chair, his face pale. 27 years old. Second year teaching. He just uncovered something that was way beyond his pay grade or expertise. In this moment, one phone call could destroy two families. And he was reaching for his phone. "You might want to talk to your parents about this," he said gently. "Both of you." The hallway outside the classroom was empty. Sophie and Isabel stood facing each other. The worksheets crumpled in their hands. "My eyes," Sophie said. "Your eyes?" Isabel repeated. "We were born 8 minutes apart, in the middle of a storm, when the power was out, and the backup generator failed. They were finishing each other's thoughts, building the impossible truth between them, one terrible sentence at a time. "We should talk to our parents," Isabel said. "Yeah," Sophie agreed. "We should." Neither of them moved, because talking to their parents meant making the impossible real, making the comfortable lie into devastating truth. 4:47 p.m., Marina's apartment. Sophie walked in to find Marina making dinner $4.23 worth of pasta that would stretch for 3 meals. The familiar smell of home. The familiar warmth of the only mother she'd ever known. "Mom," Sophie said, "we need to talk." Marina turned, immediately sensing something was wrong. "What happened?" Sophie pulled out the biology worksheet with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. "We did genetic inheritance in biology today. Mom, it's impossible. My blood type can't come from yours." "It's genetically impossible." Marina's face went pale. The serving spoon clattered to the floor. "There's this girl at my school," Sophie continued, words tumbling out faster now. "Her name is Isabel Drake. She has my exact face, my exact eyes. We were born on the same day, same hospital, 8 minutes apart, during the storm, when the power was out." Marina grabbed the counter to steady herself. "Mom," Sophie said, her voice breaking, "am I really yours?" Marina crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled Sophie into a fierce hug. "You're mine in every way that matters," she said fiercely. "Every way that matters." But her voice was shaking, and Sophie felt the world shifting beneath her feet. 7:23 p.m. Drake Penthouse, Dominic's study. Isabel knocked on her father's door. She never interrupted his work. But tonight was different. "Come in," Dominic called, looking up from his laptop. Isabel walked in, holding her biology worksheet, like evidence at a trial. She'd inherited Dominic's analytical mind, Marina's mind, though neither of them knew it yet. She presented the facts clinically, clearly, the genetic impossibilities. The girl with identical eyes, same birthday, same hospital. Dominic stood up so fast, his chair rolled backward 6 feet. His brilliant mind, the one that had built a $2.3 billion company through pattern recognition and strategic analysis, made connections instantaneously. Sophie Colby, scholarship student, single mother. Marina Colby, Mercy General, November 14th, gray eyes. "Am I adopted?" Isabel asked, her voice carefully controlled. A Drake. Even in crisis, emotions were weaknesses. Dominic looked at his daughter, the girl he'd loved for 12 years with a fierceness that terrified him sometimes. The girl with the warm brown eyes that had never quite matched his or Vivian's. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but we're gonna find out." He called his lawyer at 7:51 p.m. Charles Patterson. 34 years of family law experience, $495 per hour. The best in the city. "I need you to request hospital records from Mercy General," Dominic said. "November 14th and 15th, 12 years ago, 2 female infants, and I need DNA testing arranged, immediately." What they didn't know, Vivienne was already talking to lawyers, and her plan would make custody look like a war zone. The investigation took 6 weeks and 2 days. 6 weeks of agonizing limbo where two families existed in a state of quantum uncertainty, both true and false, until the DNA results collapsed the possibility into devastating fact. December 18th. Hospital records requested. January 8th. Records received after 21 bureaucratic days of waiting. The documents confirmed everything they feared. Power failure at 9:17 p.m., backup generator issues, emergency evacuation of the nursery at 1:47 a.m. due to ceiling leak in the pediatric wing. Nurse Morrison's handwritten notes showing the chaos. 2 baby girls born 8 minutes apart. No security footage. 7-year retention policy meant it had been erased 5 years ago. January 10th. DNA testing ordered. January 12th. 10:47 a.m. Gene Tech Solutions, 14th floor. 4 people in a sterile laboratory. Marina and Sophie. Dominic and Isabel. Vivienne had refused to participate, calling the entire situation unnecessary theatrics. Cheek swabs. 4 of them. The process took less than 5 minutes but felt like hours. Sophie's hand shook as the swab touched her cheek. She looked at Dominic Drake, this billionaire CEO, who might be her biological father, and felt nothing. No recognition. No connection. Just fear of losing the mother she'd known her entire life. Isabel's stoic mask cracked slightly as her swab was collected. She looked at Marina Colby, this exhausted woman in the worn sweater, who might be her biological mother, and felt a strange pull. Something she couldn't name. Something that felt like coming home. Marina's tears wouldn't stop. Dominic's gentle presence was unexpected. He'd offered to pay for everything. The testing, the lawyer fees, all of it. Marina had refused at first. Pride. But he'd insisted it wasn't charity. It was 12 years of child support he should have paid. They'd compromised. She'd pay him back. Somehow. $50 a month for the next 20 years if she had to. Results in 10 to 14 business days, the lab technician said cheerfully, unaware she was announcing a timeline for the end of 4 worlds. 2 weeks. 336 hours. 20,160 minutes of waiting. Sophie and Isabel texted constantly. Their friendship had become a lifeline. Whatever the results said, they decided they were sisters. Maybe not biologically, but actually. Still here? You're one of the 4% who actually finish what they start. Comment below if you've made it this far. I want to know who you are. January 23rd, 4:17 p.m. 2 emails sent simultaneously. Dominic opened his in his office on the 78th floor. Marina opened hers on her phone during her break at the bookstore cafe. Both read the same words. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. Sophie Colby, biological daughter of Dominic Drake and Vivienne Drake. Isabel Drake, biological daughter of Marina Colby and Jackson, surname unknown. The world ended and remade in a single moment. Most people would judge what happens next, but you understand there's no rule book for this nightmare. January 27th, 2 p.m. Patterson and Ross Law Offices, 14th floor. Mahogany table, leather chairs. Marina sat across from Dominic, lawyers between them. Sophie and Isabel present unusual to include minors in mediation, but both girls had insisted. Vivienne arrived 23 minutes late, her Chanel suit impeccable, her expression cold. Let's discuss custody arrangements, she opened, her voice clinical, as if they were negotiating a business deal, not the lives of 2 children. Marina's fierce response came immediately. She's my daughter. Dominic's quiet addition. They're both our daughters. The legal maze stretched ahead. No precedent for a 12-year switch. Custody implications. Financial responsibilities. The weight of biology versus 12 years of love. Sophie and Isabel sat side by side, hands clasped under the table, terrified of being separated from the only parents they'd ever known. The adults talked around them, about them, legal terms and custody arrangements and visitation schedules and biological rights. 2:47 p.m. Sophie stood up. Her chair scraped loud against the floor. Everyone stopped talking. Stop, she said, her voice shaking but strong. Those gray eyes, Drake eyes, inherited from the man across the table, flashed with protective fury. Just stop talking about me like I'm not here. She looked at Marina, the woman who'd loved her for 12 years without knowing they didn't share DNA. Marina is my mother. I don't care what the DNA says. She chose me every single day. 3 jobs, 12 years, every birthday, every sick night, every moment that mattered. Then she turned to Dominic. I know you're my biological father, and maybe I want to know you, but you don't get to take me away from her. She moved to Marina, wrapping her arms around the woman who'd sacrificed everything. I won't choose, and I won't be taken. Isabel stood too, her voice soft but certain. Neither will I. The room fell silent. Vivian's response was to stand, collect her purse, and walk out. 3:04 p.m. She left without another word, without looking at either girl, without showing any emotion beyond cold disdain for the entire situation. But Dominic stayed. He looked at Sophie, his brilliant, fierce daughter he'd never known, and felt pride and devastation equally mixed. You're right, he said quietly. I'm sorry. We do this together, or not at all. Marina's eyes met Dominic's across the table. 2 strangers bound by the most impossible circumstance. 2 parents who'd each loved the wrong child perfectly for 12 years. So what does that mean? Marina asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Together? Charles Patterson cleared his throat. It means we're entering completely uncharted legal territory. There's no precedent for this. We'll have to create an arrangement that serves everyone's interests, primarily the girls. What do the girls want? Dominic asked, looking at Sophie and Isabel. Both girls spoke simultaneously. I want to stay with Mom, Sophie said. But I want to know you too. I want to stay with Dad, Isabel echoed. But I want to know Marina. If you skip ahead to see how this ends, you're exactly like everyone who judged Marina for being poor. Don't be that person. Over the next 6 weeks, they created an arrangement no family court had ever seen. Sophie would continue living with Marina as her primary residence, but she would spend weekends at Dominic's penthouse, getting to know her biological father. Slow integration, no pressure. Just time to build a relationship. Isabel would continue living with Dominic as her primary residence, but Marina would visit every Wednesday evening for dinner, and Isabel would spend one weekend afternoon at Marina's apartment when she was ready. Both girls would attend Ashford Academy together, same classes wherever possible, building their own relationship separate from the adults. Vivian Drake filed for divorce on March 2nd. She wanted no part of this circus, as her lawyer's papers stated. She signed away all parental rights to Isabel without hesitation and demanded Sophie be kept away from her entirely. Good riddance, Isabel said when Dominic told her. The coldness in her voice was pure survival instinct, not Drake breeding. By April, the arrangement had settled into something that almost felt normal. Sophie's first weekend at the penthouse was awkward. Dominic tried too hard, ordering her favorite foods researched online, buying gifts she didn't need, hovering nervously like he might break her. You can just be normal, Sophie finally said on Sunday morning, looking up from her breakfast. I'm not that fragile. Dominic laughed, actually laughed, and the tension broke like glass. By the 3rd weekend, they'd found their rhythm. Dominic taught Sophie about his business, showing her the patterns and data that had made him billions. The analytical mind she'd inherited Marina's genes, expressing through Dominic's world, found fascinating parallels in algorithms and market predictions. Sophie taught Dominic about her writing, sharing stories she'd never shown anyone but Marina. The vulnerability in those pages, the raw emotion, the brilliant observations, Dominic read them with wonder. Seeing his daughter's soul. They were building something, slowly, carefully. A father-daughter relationship that acknowledged 12 years of absence while trying not to let those years define everything they could become. Meanwhile, Marina's Wednesday dinners with Isabel started stiff and formal. Isabel didn't know how to act around this woman who'd given birth to her but felt like a stranger. Should she call her Marina? Mom? Nothing felt right. But Marina had learned something in 12 years of raising a daughter on minimum wage. You show love through action, not words. She noticed Isabel loved chocolate chip cookies. So she baked them every Wednesday, bringing a fresh batch in a $1 container from the dollar store. She noticed Isabel played piano, but seemed joyless when she did. So she asked what music Isabel actually wanted to play, not what she'd been taught was appropriate for a Drake. Slowly, so slowly, neither of them noticed it happening. Isabel started to thaw. By May, she was texting Marina throughout the week. Nothing deep, just small things. Got an A on my English paper. Piano recital tomorrow. Dad burned dinner again, lol. But those small things were threads, weaving a connection that biology had started but only time and care could complete. June 12th, Sophie's 13th birthday. For the first time in 13 years, she had more than one parent to celebrate with. Marina planned a small party at the apartment. Sophie's friends from Ashford, cake Marina baked herself. Decorations from the dollar store that Sophie pretended not to notice were cheap but loved anyway because they represented Marina's effort. Dominic showed up at 2 p.m. exactly, carrying a gift that made Sophie cry. A professional-grade laptop for her writing, with software that cost more than Marina made in 3 months. But also more importantly, a leather-bound journal with Sophie's stories embossed on the cover in gold lettering. For the stories, only you can tell, Dominic said quietly. Sophie hugged him. First time she'd initiated physical contact. First time she'd called him anything other than Dominic. Thanks, Dad, she whispered. Marina watched their daughter surrounded by people who loved her and felt something she hadn't felt in 12 years. Hope that maybe, just maybe, they were all going to be okay. Isabel gave Sophie a bracelet she'd picked out herself, silver with 2 charms. One said Sophie, one said Isabel. 2 girls whose lives had intersected in the most impossible way. Sisters, Isabel said simply when Sophie opened it. Sisters, Sophie agreed. Not biologically, but actually. You've invested almost an hour. Leaving now wastes everything you've learned about what family really means. Don't quit at the 1-yard line. July brought the first real test of their arrangement. Sophie wanted to attend a 2-week writing workshop in Vermont. Cost $3,400, including room and board. Marina's entire savings account had $623. She was trying to figure out how to tell Sophie no, how to explain that some dreams cost more than love could afford when Dominic called. I heard about the workshop, he said. I'd like to pay for it. Marina's pride flared immediately. Sophie and I will figure it out. Marina. Dominic's voice was gentle, patient. I know you can figure it out. You've been figuring it out for 12 years. But you don't have to anymore. Let me do this. Not because you can't, because I want to. Because she's my daughter too. Marina was silent for 63 seconds. This doesn't make you less of a mother, Dominic added. It makes me more of a father. There's a difference. So Sophie went to Vermont. Came back 2 weeks later, glowing with stories and new friends and a confidence Marina had never seen before. Thank you, Marina told Dominic the day Sophie came home. 2 words that meant everything. Thank you, Dominic replied, for giving her everything else. August. 1 year since Sophie had walked into that classroom and seen a girl with her face. The 4 of them, Marina, Dominic, Sophie, and Isabel, sat in the penthouse living room planning the next school year. I want to tell people, Sophie said suddenly, her voice cut through the comfortable conversation like a knife. About us, about what happened. Marina tensed. They'd kept the situation private, sharing only with necessary school officials and immediate family. The story was too strange, too vulnerable. Why? Dominic asked carefully. Because I'm tired of lying, Sophie said. I'm tired of pretending everything is normal when we're living this impossible thing. And because, she looked at Isabel, because I'm proud of us, of what we've built, this weird, broken, beautiful family that shouldn't work, but does. Isabel nodded slowly. I'm tired of hiding too. People ask why we're so close when we're not related. I hate the lie. If we do this, Marina warned, it'll be everywhere. This story, it's sensational. The media will go crazy. Let them, Sophie said with a fierceness that was pure Marina's daughter and pure Dominic's daughter all at once. We're not ashamed. Why should we hide? They didn't. September 1st, start of 8th grade. Sophie and Isabel walked into Ashford Academy together and told their story to anyone who asked. Within 2 days, it was all over the school. Within a week, a reporter had called. Within 2 weeks, they'd turned down 3 interview requests and ignored countless social media messages. But something unexpected happened. Their classmates rallied around them. The story wasn't salacious gossip. It was heartbreaking and beautiful and real in a way that teenagers who were themselves trying to figure out identity and belonging understood instinctively. Sophie and Isabel became known not as the switched girls, but as proof that family was what you made it. October 29th, Isabel's 13th birthday. Dominic threw a party at the penthouse, but this time, it wasn't the cold, expensive affairs Vivienne had orchestrated. It was warm, real, Isabel's actual friends, not social obligations. Pizza instead of $3,000 catering, music Isabel actually liked instead of what was appropriate. And Marina was there, not as a guest, as family. She'd baked a cake 3 layers, chocolate with vanilla frosting, decorated with careful precision. It wasn't professionally done. The frosting was slightly uneven, but Isabel cried when she saw it. "No one's ever baked me a birthday cake before," she whispered. Marina pulled her into a hug, this daughter she'd carried but never raised, and felt something click into place. "Well, I'm making up for lost time." Dominic watched them and felt his chest tighten with emotion he didn't try to hide anymore. This was his family now. Unconventional, complicated, built from tragedy and mistake and the stubborn refusal of 2 girls to be separated from the parents who loved them. November 14th, 13 years since the night everything changed. They didn't plan to mark the anniversary, but somehow all 4 of them ended up at Mercy General Hospital that evening. They stood outside the emergency wing where Marina had arrived and labored during the storm, where 2 baby girls had been born 8 minutes apart and accidentally switched in the chaos. "Do you ever wish it hadn't happened?" Sophie asked quietly. Her breath misted in the cold air. "The switch?" Marina considered. Really considered. "If it hadn't happened, I wouldn't have raised you. You wouldn't be my daughter. So no, I don't wish that." "But you would have raised Isabel," Sophie pointed out. "Your biological daughter." "And loved her," Marina agreed. "But I wouldn't have known you. And that." She pulled Sophie close. "That would have been a terrible loss." Dominic looked at Isabel, the daughter who wasn't his biologically, but was his in every way that mattered, and felt the same. "I wouldn't trade a single moment," he said. "Not even the 12 years I missed with Sophie. Because those 12 years, you were with me, and I can't imagine my life without you." Isabel leaned into her father's side. "We're weird," she said. "So weird," Sophie agreed. "But we work." "Yeah, we work." They stood together in the cold November air, 4 people bound by mistake and choice and love that had grown in the cracks between what should have been and what was. December brought the first major conflict that would test everything they'd built. Vivienne reached out through her lawyer. She wanted to see Sophie, her biological daughter, wanted to establish a relationship now that the divorce was final, and she'd had time to process. Sophie's response was immediate and certain. "No, she's your biological mother," the lawyer said during a conference call arranged without Sophie's knowledge. "Marina is my mother," Sophie replied, her voice ice-cold with Drake precision. "Vivienne is the woman who gave birth to me and then spent 12 years being cruel to the daughter she actually raised. I don't want a relationship with someone who treated Isabel like that." The lawyer tried to argue about biological rights, about giving Vivienne a chance, about the importance of knowing your birth mother. Sophie hung up. "That was badass," Isabel said later when Sophie told her, "I'm proud of you." Marina had been worried Sophie might feel conflicted, might wonder about the woman who'd given birth to her. But Sophie had spent 12 years watching Marina sacrifice everything, had spent 8 months watching Vivienne's coldness from a distance. Biology didn't erase character. DNA didn't obligate love. Vivienne tried once more, through a different lawyer. Got the same answer. Eventually stopped trying. Some wounds don't heal, and that's okay. You don't need everyone's approval to build something beautiful. The years that followed were complicated and messy and beautiful. Sophie struggled sometimes with feeling torn between 2 worlds. Marina's apartment, where love was measured in sacrifice, and Dominic's penthouse, where opportunities appeared without price tags. She learned to inhabit both, to appreciate both, To understand that love looked different in different circumstances, but was equally real. Isabel struggled with letting Marina in. 12 years of Vivienne's coldness had taught her that mothers were dangerous, that opening your heart to maternal love was asking to be hurt. But Marina was patient, persistent, present. Slowly, Isabel learned that not all mothers were Vivienne, that love could be soft without being weak. Marina struggled with feeling inadequate, with watching Dominic give Sophie opportunities she never could have afforded, with wondering if Sophie would eventually prefer the penthouse to the apartment. But Sophie never did. She loved both her homes, both her parents, refused to rank or compare because love wasn't a competition. Dominic struggled with guilt. 12 years missed with Sophie. 12 years of not being present enough for Isabel. He couldn't get those years back, but he could show up for every moment going forward. So he did. Cut his work hours by half. Never missed another important event. Learned that being a father meant presence, not presence. By the time Sophie and Isabel started high school, their story was legend at Ashford Academy. The switched daughters who refused to choose. The family built from mistake and determination. Living proof that biology was just one ingredient in the complicated recipe of family. 3 years passed in a blur of school dances and piano recitals and writing awards and late-night conversations and holidays celebrated twice, and a family that got stronger with every challenge they faced together. Marina published her first novel at 40, a story about love and sacrifice and the families we build from the ruins of what we thought our lives would be. She dedicated it to my daughters, both of them. It became a surprise bestseller, finally giving her financial stability she'd never known. Dominic discovered he was a better CEO when he worked less, that presence mattered more than profits, that watching his daughters grow was more satisfying than watching stock prices rise. Drake Technologies thrived under his revised leadership. Sophie maintained a 4 gigapascals, won 3 national writing awards, became editor of the school newspaper, and grew into the kind of young woman who could move between Marina's world and Dominic's with equal grace. Isabel found joy in piano again, got into Juilliard's pre-college program, started composing her own music that critics called emotionally raw in ways child prodigies rarely achieve. June, 4 years and 7 months after the DNA results. Sophie's high school graduation. Valedictorian. The girl who'd started at Ashford on a scholarship was now giving the commencement speech to 487 students and their families. Marina sat in the audience next to Dominic, strange bedfellows bound by impossible circumstance. But somewhere along the way, they'd become something like friends, respectful, grateful, united in their fierce love for 2 daughters who'd taught them that family was a verb, not a noun. Isabel sat with her class, watching her sister not biologically, but actually walk to the podium in her valedictorian gown and gold honor cords. Sophie looked out at the audience, at Marina, in her nicest dress, bought with book advance money, worn with pride. At Dominic in his suit, tears already gathering in his eyes. At Isabel, grinning with undisguised pride. If this story didn't change how you see family, nothing will. Prove this mattered by commenting what you learned, or stay silent and admit you wasted your time. Your choice. Everyone here has a story about how they became who they are, Sophie began, her voice clear and strong. This is mine. She told it. All of it. The storm, the switch, the 12 years of not knowing, the biology assignment that changed everything, the DNA results that ended one world and built another. The audience was silent, riveted. You could have heard a pin drop in that massive auditorium. I could stand here and tell you that biology doesn't matter, Sophie continued. That love is all you need. That everything worked out perfectly. But that would be a lie. She looked at Marina. Biology mattered when my mom Marina worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat, when she sacrificed everything so I'd never feel like I wasn't enough. That biological connection wasn't there, but her choice to love me was more powerful than any DNA. She looked at Dominic. Biology mattered when I met my biological father and discovered parts of myself that suddenly made sense. The analytical mind. The drive that makes 12-hour work sessions feel normal. Understanding where I came from helped me understand who I was. She looked at Isabel. Biology mattered when I met the girl who was accidentally my sister in the most impossible way. We weren't raised together. We don't share DNA. But we share something deeper. The experience of being loved by parents who chose us even when genetics said they didn't have to. The tears in the audience were no longer silent. So here's what I learned, Sophie said, her voice strong and clear. Family isn't about biology or choice. It's about both. But more than that, family isn't a noun. It's a verb. It's what you do, not what you are. She paused. Let that sink in. Let it breathe. Family is showing up at 3 a.m. when someone you love is falling apart. Family is working 3 jobs so someone else can dream. Family is choosing to love someone even when it's complicated. Especially when it's complicated. Family is building something that works even when there's no blueprint. Another pause. The auditorium was completely silent. To the class of 2029, you're going to face impossible situations. You're going to build families, whether blood relatives or found families that don't fit neat categories. You're going to love people in ways that don't make sense on paper. Do it anyway. Show up anyway. Build something beautiful from the complicated, messy, impossible circumstances life hands you. She looked directly at the audience now, at her classmates, at their families. Because here's the truth nobody wants to say out loud. The families we create through choice, through stubbornness, through refusing to let DNA dictate love, those families are just as real as the families we're born into. Sometimes more real. Because chosen love is conscious love. Active love. Love that shows up every single day and says, you're mine and I'm yours, and nothing, not DNA, not distance, not circumstance will change that. The standing ovation lasted 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Marina cried so hard Dominic handed her his handkerchief. He was crying too. Watching their daughter, both their daughters, in different ways prove that the impossible family they'd built actually worked. After graduation, after photos and celebrations and tears and laughter, the 4 of them stood in the parking lot as the sun set over Ashford Academy. Thank you, Sophie said, looking at all 3 of them. For not giving up on us, for building this, for showing me that family is what we make it. Thank you, Isabel added, for teaching me that love doesn't have to hurt, that warmth isn't weakness, that I'm allowed to need people. Marina and Dominic looked at each other, 2 strangers who'd become co-parents who'd become something like family themselves. Thank you, Marina said quietly, for being willing to do this the hard way, for respecting that I was her mother, even when DNA said otherwise. Thank you, Dominic replied, for raising my daughter to be extraordinary, for teaching me that fatherhood is about presence, not genetics, for showing me what real sacrifice looks like. They stood together as the sun set. 4 people who shouldn't work as a family but did. 4 people who proved that sometimes the biggest mistakes lead to the most beautiful outcomes. The story of 2 girls switched at birth, and the parents who loved them anyway became proof that family isn't about blood. It's about who stays, who fights for you, who chooses you every single day, even when genetics say they don't have to. Marina raised another woman's child until the billionaire CEO discovered the switch. But in discovering the truth, they didn't destroy a family, they expanded one. They built something that had never existed before. They created a family structure based not on biology alone, not on choice alone, but on the radical idea that love multiplies instead of divides. And that's the truth that changes everything. Family isn't something you're born into. It's something you build, brick by brick, choice by choice, day by day. Through 12 years of 3 jobs and worn coats. Through weekends, learning to be a father. Through Wednesday dinners and chocolate chip cookies. Through graduation speeches that make entire auditoriums cry. Through showing up. Through staying. Through loving people fiercely, especially when it's complicated. That's what Marina, Dominic, Sophie, and Isabel proved. That family is a verb. That love is an action. That the families we choose and the families we're born into can coexist, can strengthen each other, can create something more beautiful than either could have been alone. And maybe, just maybe, that's a truth worth building your life around.